ended up working with. But the interesting thing though is it has many translations, right, in English. I think most of our participants here Chinese speaking, if not Chinese born native speakers to begin with. It could be translated as authenticity, as it's listed in your program, but also real and reality, and of course another term is truth, right? So all these words or translations resonate with each other, refer to each other, but also diverge in many ways in terms of their connotations, denotations, and connotations. So we won't be able to have the time to exhaust etymological study of the term here, but I think we have some common understanding about what we are after, authenticity in relation to our relationship to the object of representation and the subject of representation that many of the independent Chinese filmmakers have been working so hard to accomplish, achieve, or approximate, at least for the last, good 30 plus years. Around 1990, that's sort of where the Chinese independent cinema more or less emerged in the aftermath or in the shadow of the 1989 democracy movements. So some of the earliest documentaries and feature films and also experimental films were made around that time. And what kind of, I think, spurred that earlier Indian movement, which was not so much called Indian at that time yet. It was a desire to depart from the previously state-sanctioned, sponsored, mandated film industry. Everything was state-controlled, resources and the censorship and the representations and so on. So in the spirit of reform and the market economy and the state sectors, studios were crumbling, like with all other state sectors, industries, and such that Wang Bing's 铁西曲 urgently and significantly captured, right? So film studio was part of that restructuring or transformation, 转型. So in many ways, it was a response and reaction to the discourse. It's sort of a state discourse in a way, coming from the reformists. The mantra at the time was 实践是检验真理的标准, right? Practice. Oh, the 实践 has the 真实实 inside. Reality should be the measure, criteria for measuring truth. And this was obviously a reaction to earlier decades of, especially during the Cultural Revolution, hyperbolic propaganda rhetorics and cultural productions, right? So, it was part of that larger social and economic transformations. What also made those early practitioners, the sixth generation filmmakers, Jia Zhangke was actually a bit later. Actually, the earlier ones were Zhang Yuan, Wang Xiaoshuai, and Lou Yi, and so on. And also in documentaries, working both inside and outside of the state sectors, studios, people like Shi Jian, Jiang Yue, and Wen Guang also was, one of them. Usually, a few filmmakers got singled out later by Western festival curators and the critics and so on, become sort of consecrated father figures, which is kind of problematic. So as a historian, I always try to reconstruct collective efforts and communal struggles. So gradually, there's more people taking part, including also women filmmakers such as Yang Lina, Ji Dan, and Feng Yan, and many more. And some of them recently we reunited in Newcastle at the event for the inauguration of Chinese Independent Film Archive, and the Echo was there. So we met, and we, I got invited to do this with that occasion. So I would just want to say, generally the independent cinema and documentary in particular was trying to take issues and take a distance from the so-called 专题片, the television God's sort of bird view, voiceover, usually is male authoritarian, sort of authoritative voice, but still containing authoritarian sort of vestige. So that was a major contribution of this emerging independent cinema and documentary. And another important concept and theme was not entirely invented by the independent cinema filmmakers, but they seized upon it and really expanded its semantic as well as I would say even, ontological importance, which is 现场, and the being on the scene, being right there when things are happening, instead of pre-recorded and prefabricated as in television studios, in most of, if not all, state-sponsored productions, films, fictional or non-fictional, right? So 实践 and 现场 practice and the present scene were crucial sites for the birth of the independent spirit and practice. So I just want to review a little bit of that. And I think also in many ways, the name of Real China, 真实中国, that we have been showcasing in New York since 2001, was very much connected to that spirit of searching for truth that's sort of hidden from view and also concealed and even covered up and inhibited by state and its aesthetics as well as production methods. So I think some of the earlier alternative curatorial and exhibition practices overseas, with Real China, actually was founded not by myself, actually by a few diaspora Chinese artists and critics, and they connected the contemporary art world with the film, independent cinema, especially documentary world, and then we began to collaborate. But then they seized the operation and left sort of this arena, and we installed it at NYU and made it recurring, consistent platform for supporting independent cinema from China. But occasionally we also would include films from Hong Kong and Sinophone sphere in general, Singapore and elsewhere. And then more recently, if you look at our last edition, there was increased also representation of diaspora overseas Chinese students' works. Not that the world has changed so much under the last 30 years, and also in particular with the pandemic and geopolitical reconfigurations, the sort of return of the Cold War cultural politics. I think what used to be seen as Chinese independent cinema and or Real China for that matter, faced with you over there and we over here, and those in China that are no longer able to officially, publicly showcase these works in a more systematic way as back in Songzhuang and Nanjing. I think we are all faced with new challenges in terms of definitions and methodologies and the ways of collaborating with each other. So I think this is sort of just a quick review of what I understand to be the history of these concepts and practices, and how exhibition and curation are important integral dimension of the independent practice. Filmmakers' contributions are tremendous as pathbreakers, but I think without exhibitors and distributors and festival forum organizers like you guys there, it would be a very different, much diminished in terms of the impact of the independent cinema corpus. And also as a feminist scholar, curator, I've been, Louisa knows that very well. She has been coming to New York and showing her works at NYU and elsewhere, trying very hard to diversify and also insert gender queering discourses into independent cinema, which in the beginning was very predominantly masculine, male-centered community and culture. And internally, there are also quite a bit of issues and problems in terms of gender equality and inclusion and so on. So I think when we promote independent cinema, write about it and discuss about it, promote it, we also need to talk about the complexities of its history and different components and generations, and very much, trying to highlight and promote further marginalize the voices, women and queer filmmakers. So this is, just a quick footnote I want to add here. But what about the films? I need to cut my time quickly now. Just a little bit comment on a couple of films I saw on your program in preparation for this forum. I have seen Louisa's films before. I haven't seen this new edition. I really would look forward to. But the ones I saw in the last few days, the one is this Tibetan documentary about the orphan girl, which touched me very much. And I was also both sad and happy to see that the Pema Tsetan was one of the executive producers, and which really brought back a lot of fond memories of Pema, who's a very dear friend. And I appreciate the inclusion of such work. I noticed this is the film that actually has a dragon seal, has the Longbiao in it, which explains also in some ways the complexity of the existence of alternative filmmaking. I think, independent as we conceptualized, in our publication and by other scholars in Southeast Asian independent cinema, there's a hyphen always in, until the dependence, there's always a certain dynamic that is in a matrix in relation to the state, to mainstream, to capital. So I think this film's production context, just with Pema's some of the late works that are Dragon Seal approved, I think says something about the young filmmakers' desire to find space within a very challenging situation in mainland China at this point. So the film, is, I would call these films, Yang Lina's film lately has also, accorded Dragon Seals and able to be theatrically released. I see this as a middle ground alternative cinema. They're not exactly underground indie in an old way, conventional sense, but they're not, propagandist, melody films, and they may be able to pass the censors because they touch on social economic issues, but not exactly getting into the sensitive, forbidden areas too deeply, too extensively. And we need these kind of films too, about everyday life experiences. The other film, a Marble Travelogue, which I had been wanting to see for a long time. So I was very happy to be able to see it at last. And this was shown as part of the Art of the Real program at Lincoln Center in New York last year, which I missed then. So now I understand, why this film would go in that category very fittingly. There's a new crop of global documentaries. This is very much a global documentary. It's on a very different end from the earlier, more personal, individually made documentaries, indie films. One person, one camera, like Wang Bing's first few films, and even Jidan's more recent film, Baya, we saw in UK was, 个人电影, personal, really independent in terms of individual also point of view. But there's this new crop of films that are more industrial in terms of production mode and crew and the transnational capital. And, the resources do help to cover a wide range of geographic expenses and complex strands of narratives and issues. But I enjoyed the film quite a lot. It is great commentary on globalization and the rise of China right before the pandemic. But the coda, the epilogue, somewhat ironically ended on a different note when the pandemic and the recent geopolitical changes during the post-production sort of witnessed the kind of decline of the rise of China in some ways. So this is quite interesting to see how such a documentary film made in step with time is changing with its epoch too, when tides shifted and discourse shifted, then the film, changed its tone, also over the time. But interestingly, maybe with youth too, which you haven't seen, but the scale of it and sort of large crews, multiple cameras, a lot of entities involved in the investment and distribution and festival going. I feel it has gone a very long way since the inception of Chinese Indian cinema. And now it is a more industrial mode of production indeed. But at the same time, there is I'm being a bit more polemical here and controversial perhaps because I listened to Froden's video earlier. The continued consecration of author, especially male author, I think in this setting needs to be reconsidered, and what kind of reality it produces and manufactures, and how it is different, and in what ways from the earlier time when that movement and the culture began. So I just thought I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Zhang Zhen. That was very informative and insightful. Before we have a very in-depth discussion of your presentation, let's move on to the next speaker. Liu Ying, are you ready?
Yes.
The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. Unfortunately, I cannot be in Berlin in person with you guys, but I'm very happy to have this chance to share some of my opinions and views on the topic. I have to say that like authenticity of the Chinese cinema is a very broad and complex connotation that needs very systematic discussion. So I could only, of course, I can't reach every aspect within 10 minutes, and I would rather focus on like my working experience and what I do in my everyday work to touch this topic a little bit. I think re-examining the issue of authenticity in the present context still holds great cultural, industrial, and societal significance. This is not only because of the rapid changing social reality in China, which continuously challenges the thoughts and perceptions of the filmmakers themselves, forcing them to continually revise their understanding of reality so that they can continue their creative work, but also because the cinema industry is now operated in a more globalized way. So in the context of globalization, there has been an emergence of cross-border creators, cross-border filmmakers that we see very clearly in this year's ICCW program. And as mentioned by Professor Zhang Zhen on the Marble Travelogue and Professor Louisa Wei's Havana Diva or even Wang Bing's Youth, they are all very typical examples of such cross-culture and cross-national cinematic narratives. I think this is really something new and something very important in nowadays Chinese language cinema, because this brings greater diversity and allows films to engage with the presentation and discussion of authenticity from different perspectives. Since now I'm living in Europe, I also have the chance to meet lots of filmmakers who are working cross-borderly. Some of them are Chinese filmmakers who studied and live in Europe, for example. Some of them were born here, and they are the kids of the first generation of migrants. So they have a very complex self-identity, which they eagerly explore through their cinematic works. Some filmmakers still reside in China, but they choose to focus on the protagonists who are wandering around globally. And some of the filmmakers who stay here in Europe, but choose to shoot the protagonists and the stories still inside the Chinese society. So these are all very complex origins of the stories and storytellings that increase multiple layers to the connotation of authenticity. Of course, we must not overlook there are the works of emerging filmmakers and even established filmmakers from the larger Chinese-speaking territories, such as the filmmakers from Singapore and Malaysia and some other Asian countries. They have been working on the Asian identity and the Chinese-ness in their films from another different perspective. For example, director Tan Cui-mei, the Malaysian female director Chen Cui-mei, who also released her last film, Bavarian Invasion, in China last year. I think this kind of conversation and this kind of travel of films from one Chinese-speaking territory to mainland China also creates more space for us to discuss about authenticity and Chinese-ness. And of course, there are also a new category of Chinese directors who no longer explicitly discuss Chinese-ness in their work. They try to integrate themselves into the film industry environment where they operate. For example, last year at Warsaw International Film Festival, there was a film called What Remains. It's actually a Swedish story shot in Finland by a Chinese filmmaker, and the film was entirely in English. So it's really like this cross-border multinational operation. And another example is a film called Killing the Violet, which just premiered at the recent Pingyao Film Festival. It is a graduation feature by Chinese director Zhang Yu, who is also a female director. She made the story. This is like entirely 100% made in Japan story, and the themed story are both or in Japanese, even though the director herself is Chinese. So this work also provides fresh examples and perspectives for exploring the concept of Chineseness or Asian identity and showcase the vitality of Chinese language directors, especially the new generation growing up in a cross-cultural background. Actually, I think so from my daily experience, I also want to touch a bit about the production and the distribution and their impact on the so-called authenticity, because it's really, like, for me, my personal experience kind of shifted my point of view in discussing a film as a pure piece of art. I would rather call a film a piece of industrial work, because during all this like the long procedure of filmmaking, of project development, you can really see lots of arguments, negotiations, and compromises that finally contributed to a film, to a final piece of work. And also over the years, there have been significant changes in the way a Chinese language film is produced and distributed. For example, the target market for a film, or how to find the potential audiences, and all these considerations by directors and screenwriters would really reflect in their creative work. In comparison to the previous discussions of films through textual analysis, that's why I said I now first view a film as industrial products. So let's consider the fact that although China is not doing the so-called co-production very aggressively, as individuals, some directors succeeded in getting the fund or getting the investment from some places outside China. For example, the funding may come from film festival investment platforms, or the support from specific institutions for project developments, or through pre-sale rights from distribution channels. Regardless of the method used, individuals who come into the project alongside this funding have their own demands. Typically, most European countries have their co-production support programs, which differ from investments in that the funds provided generally do not require repayment. In a sense, this can ensure the director's creative freedom. However, to obtain this official funding, the project must involve a local production company, and it's always through this local producer that a project can be submitted to the committee. So while they may bring some diverse perspectives, these European producers sometimes would also make requests that contradict to the original intention of the creators. I've heard more than one creator. I've heard lots of stories from multiple filmmakers, especially documentary filmmakers, to express their confusion about similar project development experiences. Sometimes the European producers often approach a Chinese story with so to say, Western perspective, hoping to emphasize certain stereotypes in the stories. And I think this can also have a significant impact on the authenticity of the film. So in the end, we say, yeah, some films cannot be produced in China because of certain contents are very sensitive. Therefore, they seek fundings outside China. But does these fundings secure the pure authenticity of the content? I think we should also raise a question mark here. But of course, more works are still being produced within the context of mainland China. And as a matter of fact, the rules of how the rules of the mainland Chinese film industry are quite unique and complex. On one hand, it is a massive box office market. At least before the pandemic, the Chinese film industry has constantly boasted impressive box office figures. But of course, the pandemic made a huge shift on the whole situation. On the other hand, it's also a market with extremely uneven distribution of resources. Art house films really achieve ideal results in the mainland cinemas, and the overall economic downturn has also made online platforms less willing to invest heavily in acquiring art house films. Nowadays, more and more art house films are willing to cast A-list celebrities with the hope to attract a larger audience and boost the box office numbers. For example, Bi Ganyu's Tang Wei and Huang Jue in Long Day's Journey into Night. And I think it was maybe the beginning of using A-list celebrities in art house cinema in China. However, it has also been proven that merely relying on the star power of celebrities without effective marketing and promotion, it's still quite a challenging task to ensure the satisfying box office performance. In this context, the overseas market has become another focal point for Chinese-speaking filmmakers. In my daily work, I found that almost all the art house or independent filmmakers consider international film festivals and the overseas market as the first step in film distributions. They hope that through exposure at festivals, their film can generate some sales revenues in overseas market to compensate for potential box office shortcomings in mainland China. What I've noticed compared to the previous generations of filmmakers is that this new generation of directors has a global audience in mind. More independent directors, if they don't want to submit the films to the censorship board, they would completely forego the domestic market. And this means they would prioritize overseas Chinese or international audience as their primary target audience. So this having the international audience in mind as the main receptionist of their films will also inevitably affect their storytelling techniques and therefore the authenticity of the film. And the last point, of course, I think we would have the chance to discuss later is about the censorship. So it's always a thing to consider when we talk about Chinese cinema. You can't bypass it. So of course, this specific procedure in the Chinese cinema affects a lot the creative procedure of the filmmakers, and therefore when it's very interesting when Professor Zhang Zhen mentioned lots of independent filmmakers now succeeded in obtaining the Dragon Seal for their new film, for their recent films, and they are entering an area where they are kind of they will have the chance to distribute their films legally within the Chinese system. So the transition of those filmmakers from complete underground filmmakers to somehow legit filmmakers in the Chinese context is also a very interesting procedure to observe, and how the censorship affects the authenticity is another big topic that maybe we will have time to touch in later on. Yeah, so I think that's my presentation, and I'm looking forward to hearing more comments and feedbacks from the panelists and the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lillian. That was fantastic, and I learned a lot from your presentation too. And next, we have Professor Louisa Wei.
I just want to take a minute to remember my documentary professor, Professor Situ Xiaodun, who said, "Documentary is a life attitude." And so I started learning and filming documentary from 2003. That was 20 years ago. Can you go to the next slide? Basically was when I was doing my PhD in Canada in the 1990s, the fifth generation filmmakers like Zhang Yimou and Chen Kaige, these are people who are on the rise. So my dissertation is on the fifth generation. And one of the directors of this generation who also got her MFA in NYU was Peng Xiaolian. And so she one day asked me and if I want to make a film with her. And she was, of course, she was mostly producing feature drama, but then she wanted to make a documentary film about her father's experience in the turbulent political campaign years of China. And but at the same time, there are other things happening to me because I moved to Hong Kong, and then we are a production school and mostly focus on film at the time. And so two people asked me to fix their script. And then so I sort of, these become my two script writing work, mostly as a script doctor, but then Gang of the Mercy, I like rewrote 90%. So this is the start. And then I was able to film Cui Jian, the first rocker of China from 2005, and who had a new album, and the EMI Hong Kong was promoting this album. So I made a short film called Cui Jian Rocking China in 2006. Next slide, please. And then the working with Peng Xiaolian took about we started off in 2003, and in 2007 we had the first version of Storm Under the Sun, which is a documentary about Mao Zedong's political campaign against the intellectuals in 1955. And this trial lasted for a long time because many people were imprisoned for 25 years until the case was redressed in 1980. And Xiaolian's father was involved in the case as one of the victims. And of course, this documentary was one of the first Chinese independent documentary that was trying to cover a historical subject. So yeah, I think our film was a bit earlier than Hu Jie's two film about the Cultural Revolution and also the anti-rightist movement. So Storm Under the Sun was, it took me another year and a half to finish the current version right now. And so it actually was never intended to show in China, even though there's quite a circulation, as I know, especially they have a sort of a secret language online. They were just do you have the resource of Storm Under the Sun? And then somebody would send you a Baidu link with a passcode. And so it was circulated this way. And then I also worked on two films on the writers for Radio Television Hong Kong. That was a government-owned a Hong Kong film festival with two writers. And most recently, A Life in 6 Chapters. This is about another two writers who are the friend of this guy in Storm Under the Sun is Hu Feng. So these works are all interrelated, and they were covering 20th century's intellectual history on that. Next slide, please. And the two of my perhaps a best known film that went around a lot were Golden Gate Girls and tonight's film Havana Divas. but tonight you're gonna see the new version, like 2023 version for the first time in Europe. And so Golden Gate Girl traces back Hong Kong's first woman director, whose name is Esther Ng. And Esther Ng is a third-generation Chinese-American woman. And so this film also incorporated the story of Hollywood's first Asian actress, Anna May Wong, and also early sound Hollywood's only woman director, Dorothy Osner. So the three of them were contemporaries. And I guess if I have a style, and then that would be to present a background of the central figure in my film. And then so that you would see how to judge them. Because nowadays, if you see Esther Ng's look, and some of my students wouldn't know that she's gay. But then if you do some historical research, you would know that's a typical butch look in the 1930s. But she was an open lesbian and went around, never hide her relationship. And when she started to make a film, she was barely 20 years old. She already rented a studio in Hollywood and co-produced a film called Heartache, which she brought to Hong Kong in 1936. And the next year, she became the first, she directed her first film without any training in filmmaking. And she just learned cinema by watching lots of films and working at the box office of the Mandarin, which is a theater showing both cinema and Cantonese opera in San Francisco. And Esther was only 23 years old. So I felt that some of the early pioneers were really inspiring because they were just fearless. They were just very courageous. And then if they think of something, they would do it. So Esther was not only a pioneer of filmmaking, but she was also a pioneer in opening a high-class Chinese restaurant in the Western world. So one of her restaurants with the English name Esther Ng was on the album of Madonna's first single. So you could see it's an iconic image of New York Chinatown. And while I was making this film, I realized that, the transnational Chinese filmmaking was like really popular and already in the 1920s and 1930s. Many people think Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon was the first transnational Chinese film, but it's like far away from that. So Esther, while she was making Cantonese film in Hong Kong and in the US, and then one of the film she made called Golden Gate Girl in 1941 has a 3-month-old Bruce Lee in it. And so that was Bruce Lee's first film. And then I realized that in North America and Central America, there was a Chinatown network where not only they distribute Chinese language film through this network, and this is, of course, a network of trade as well. But they also invited Cantonese opera troupes to perform around this network. And so then I had a chance to meet these two ladies, Galidad Amalan and Georgina Udialis. And so the two of them, and this one has no Chinese blood at all. And Georgina was half Chinese and half Cuban, and Black Cuban. And so I met them in Hong Kong, and then they sing a episode of Cantonese opera to me, which just blew me away. And I was like, where did you learn this? And how did this happen? And so I went back to Havana in 2015 and made Havana Divas. And at the same time, like I reconstructed Cuba's historical background from the 1920s to all the way until 2010s when the divas come back to Hong Kong to perform. And so tonight you will see the film covers the story of when the two of them, one has a foster Chinese father, the other has like a real Chinese father. And when the fathers immigrated to Cuba in the 1920s and all the way until 2019, when the two ladies came back to Hong Kong to perform on stage. They were performing a Cantonese opera that was in fashion 70 years ago, and they brought their own music notes, and the young musicians of Hong Kong, they played this, the orchestra played according to their notes. So it was like a really, you just can't imagine something like that could happen. And so I asked lots of questions, and now it's this film actually created a little like circle in Hong Kong, because it did show in a theater for several dozen times. And then we have Hong Kong's young people, when they actually went to Cuba, they would try to find the divas in the Chinatown. And so there was, yeah. And if you watch tonight's film, you will get a set of these, like, you know, they're fashionable 1950s studio photo I made into poster cards. So this is basically my, most of my, I want to use just 1 minute to introduce, next slides, please. One of my students' film, which was also, yeah, next slide. These are my books. And in this program, it's called 32+4. So I'm one of the very few professors really teaching documentary productions in Hong Kong. And I think I have more students than other professors, because like this right now, my class is 67 students in documentary 1. And so Chen Haozhong, and she was one of the students in my documentary class, and she made an 8-minute film about her father. And then she developed this film into a graduation work that's 30 minutes, which was served as the basis of 32+4. We even suggested a 32+4 to her, because her original film was called My Father. And I said, like, you know, this title will sink, because if you Google My Father, and then everything comes up has nothing to do with your film. And we call it like you will find out why it's called a 32+4. So I'm not giving any spoiler here. This is a very typical Hong Kong family story with lots of family secrets in it. And it has like won many gold awards, including Hong Kong's IDFA and Chinese Documentary Film Festival, and also in Germany. I forgot the short film competition that runs like you know, even George Lucas like participate as a student. So she won the principal award of that, and so. Yeah, just give a minute to recommend this this film. And so that's, yeah, I think I used my 40 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your very engaging presentation. It's always nice to get to know your career as a documentary filmmaker better. And last but not least, we have Leo as our final speaker.
I don't know until what time we have now. It's very brave of you to stay so long after already a 3.5-hour long film. So thank you. Yeah, I'll keep it short. But yeah, it was really interesting to hear like the different approaches over the main topic of authenticity. Also because we all occupy different positions in like the chain of like the process of filmmaking. And yeah, as an editor, it's interesting because I'm really disconnected, but also making an effort to stay disconnected or like oblivious to these sides of like production and the industry. And because yeah, I feel like as an editor, you're really grounded and you're really like in the kitchen, like really at the craft, at the table, like having this reality check moment with the filmmaker where it's like you cannot like be in this process of overselling the film, like it's going to be about this, it's going to be about that, like for commissions, for production, where you're like imagining that your film is going to be like so grand, and then yeah, you're also not yet in the distribution process where you're like promoting and stuff, like, you know, you need to watch my film, it's so great. You're really in this like quite difficult moment also where after like working on a film for like years, it's gonna have its final form, it's gonna be translated into an artifact, because like yeah, what's interesting with if I would approach it like just the object of a film and not like the industry process or the concept of like what the film is gonna be, but like yeah, it's very real when you're in the editing room, because like why is there someone else talking? It's in my head. It's in my head. But like, yeah, we tend to give this power of recording and representation of truth, of reality to films, because it's a derivation from photography. And in our mind, photography is like this imprint of light on a negative. It's like very tangible, and it's a trace you can keep from reality. It's quite unique in history of technology. And then a film is like 25 of these photographies in 1 second. And then it's a lie. It's not reality. It's not the truth. You cannot. So first of all, about like truth and reality and authenticity, I don't believe that you can not only record reality but also apprehend it in an objective way. So from this stance already, it's like, for me, the film is a point of view, and it's a point of view of a filmmaker or of a collective filmmaking process. That is the way of being authentic is to be truth and to be honest to that point of view and to that position that you occupy at the moment where you make the film, I think. And then as an editor, you are in this process of translating this point of view and this perception, this unique perception in time and history into an artifact. And to me, what makes an artifact art is that art is the only way to transmit emotions through time. And that's something that Wang Ping was saying often when we were working. And I really like this definition because it's very broad, and it's also it has something historical that you transmit things through time. And also it keeps the subjective and the emotional side of filmmaking alive, because it's like you connect and you transmit emotions, and like I'm getting lost, but yeah, editing is really this act of translating into an object, like cutting all this recorded time, all this time that was recorded on film, and cutting it into a smaller piece of time, like cutting 2,000 hours of footage into 9 hours. Even if 9 hours is still a lot, it's like already just this process of cutting down time, that's how you make the film emerge. It's like cutting a piece of wood until a statue, or a piece of marble, like in marble travelogue film thing. But yeah, it's I think that very long and difficult process of cutting down time into a piece of time that you're gonna give as an experience to the viewer. My position in this process is interesting because I'm a bit in both ends. I'm already on the receiving end because I'm the first spectator of the film, and I'm also on the maker's end. So yeah, in the case of the Wang Ping film, I would say that type of editing was very specific because yeah, Wang Ping's editing method, you were very curious about it, but it's very specific because it's so connected to his own experience on the shoot that it respects a lot of rules. It's not like film essay where you can put voiceover and music and like put the beginning and the end. It's like very chronological. He never cheats with like the order in which things happened, because he says audience is gonna feel that you lie. And because he's so obsessed with like recording history and recording time, that he needs to respect like the evolution and how the soul changes and how people grow, especially in this film. He stays so long with the youngsters and you see them grow old, that it's very important that everything happens in the order. And then, I think what informs us, like, I was thinking, how do you stay authentic because editing is manipulation. It's for sure manipulation, because you're gonna put things in the film that are unspoken, but that people are gonna feel. So you're like playing with feeling, playing with emotion, and like, how do you keep this honesty and this authenticity while you edit? And I think I would say empathy. I would say something I witnessed really strongly working with Wang Ping, and in general that I try to apply when I edit, is to keep this very simple, very human skill that is empathy. Because if Wang Ping had a lot of empathy when he's shooting, and it's informing his experience of the filmmaking process, and then that I can share this empathy as an audience that can like connect to what he felt, I think the audience will also receive it. And empathy is also open enough that they will empathize based on their own experience. So it's not like you're like explaining something like you should feel like this. It's like you're giving an experience in time that people are going to receive. So I think that's something that guides you always when you're cutting. And then you have to both be like receiving, like you watch a cut for I don't know how many times, and you feel, and then you're like, how did I feel, and how is it like the correct way to convey this experience that the filmmaker had, and then you think of how to change it so that it's more relevant. And how long did I speak already?
I think you have given some very amazing points. Maybe I would just carry on from what you were talking about. I think I was very, very impressed by your idea that editing is a process of translation. But I think everyone on this panel, in a way, is a translator. For example, Professor Zhang Zhen, as a curator, is translating for those filmmakers by screening their films overseas in New York. And of course, Liu Ying is a translator in the literal sense, because she needs to translate what the co-founders from outside of China want from the filmmakers who are still based in China. And of course, Professor Louisa Wei is a translator who's translating history, who's speaking for people who are not really close to the audience lives, right? You are translating the events that have really taken place in the past. And Leo is also a translator who is translating reality through the format of editing. It's in a way, as you said, kind of manipulation, but then it's an artistic process of really mingling everything together through emotions, through empathy, so the audience can connect with the people on the screen better. I actually have many questions, but because of the time limit, we will give I can ask questions? Okay, great. I have a lot of questions. Maybe I will start with a question to Professor Zhang Zhen. Professor Zhang Zhen, you mentioned that over the past 30 years, there are different generations of filmmakers that have emerged in the field of Chinese indie cinema. And I wonder if those different generations have demonstrated different interests in their subjects. What I mean is, do they have different choices in picking subjects? Do they have different styles in presenting those people? Because based on my understanding, a lot of indie filmmakers usually like to capture the lives of marginalized people. Do you think over the 30 years, the ways indie filmmakers that kind of present the lives of those marginalized groups have changed, have shifted? given their different life experiences.
Thank you. I mean, of course. Oh, sorry. Are you finished? Yeah. It would be strange if there were no changes. And also, to begin with, there are different kinds of filmmakers using different formats and technologies, and engaging in different relationships with the state television system. Like Wenguang, particularly used CCTV's equipment to moonlight on his filming in Beijing and so on. So without getting into more details, maybe from my observations, I would say, and also we wrote about that in those in DV China. Broadly, critic Wang Xiaolu talked about a large group of filmmakers in those early years, decades, 1.5, especially with transitional technologies when DV was still not available, adopted a more observational direct cinema approach. He called that approach 静观, and he thinks it's different from the Frederick Wiseman's direct cinema, fly on the wall approach, but has a certain affinity with Chinese intellectual tradition of a sort of contemplative and ethically concerned relationship to the subject and the reality. And I think that is a very perceptive observation. But from also about early 2000s, after DV became more readily available, and new filmmakers, women, Yanina and others, enter the arena, and without any relation to CCTV or this sixth generation of Beijing Film Academy, they just started on their own and made a very personal kind of cinema, very also involving their own subjectivity within the film, more participatory, more self-reflexive, and also this increasing number around 2004-05, I would say a kind of activist, interventionist approach to the medium, to the independent filmmaking, those who are much more concerned with intervening and changing the reality rather than just standing by and watching, silently, although attentively, like Wang Bing and many others. They would put themselves on the front line and getting involved in their subjects' daily life. I couldn't name many, but for starters, Zhao Liang's petitions, although also largely direct cinema, but increasingly involving interaction with the subjects, and the consequences, the ethical implications of filming the marginalized or the so-called 底层 people. So there was a rising awareness of relationship between filmmaker and the film, the subject. And also maybe on the more radical side, you will have Wei Chuan, rights activists such as Ai Xiaoming and Ai Weiwei in some ways too, who took up independent film. I always singular case, so I'm not going to touch on him at all here. But Ai Xiaoming and also queer activists, filmmakers, Cui Zeng, and you also have Fan Po now based in Berlin. They, I think, approach the medium, the filmmaking, with a much more radical interventionist agenda. So, and more recently, as Liu Ying also mentioned, and I also showed in our Real China Last Edition program, the younger generation tend to be more well-educated and middle class. These are the offspring of the Chinese new middle class, the affluent, who are able to study abroad, like many of you here, and without having to, toy in Chinatown, washing dishes and so on, as in previous generations of immigration. So they went to film schools, in France and BFI and whatnot, and and would tap into subjects. Some of them would go back to China to film, like Wang Nanfu, and Chen Dongnan and so on, right? They went back to film the ethnic minorities, the right, the feminist, rights movement activists like Ye Hai and so on. But others would also take up subjects right around them, where they live, in Chinatowns, in New York, and emerging diaspora, queer communities, and so on. So I think, it is broader now. It is a more horizontal sort of spread in terms of both the filmmakers' locations and their subject matters, but also along the way, the funding system, the festival culture, the mushrooming of alternative outlets, exhibition spaces like yours there, and Rio China for more than 2 decades, also helped to disseminate these works, creating a more cross-cultural or cosmopolitan audience, as it were. So these are just some of my observations.
Thank you so much. And I think we have some questions from the audience. Okay. Yes, of course, please.
Hello. Hi, Professor Zhang Zhen, thanks for your answering. Can you see me? Anyway, I'm Echo. Yeah, thanks for accepting our invitation. Something was on my mind. I'm trying to bridge. So after Leo's speech, talking about how, as an editor, the way to sort of stay to or to remain the authenticity is to have this empathy aligned with the director and also with the subjects. And then and Professor Zhang Zhen was just talking about like how those new generation of filmmakers who are more from those new middle class backgrounds, and who some of them actually quite a few of them choose to also start filming about the subjects that to some extent are actually other to them, the more marginalized or the more or the less privileged communities, which are not from their original world. And I think this is half comment and half question, because as a curator now based in Berlin and working on this film festival presented to both the non-Chinese audience and Chinese audience, I also have my own bubble, right? I also grew up in a big city and having overseas experience, study experience, blah, blah, blah. And and while I'm curating the films, the first thing I watch the film, I also need to emphasize with the subjects as the very core way of understanding them, because I have to understand the film, and then I will start thinking about if I should curate this film and present to a larger audience. And when I present this film to the larger audience, what would I say to the audience? So I guess, yeah, I'm trying to, actually a lot of thoughts spinning in my mind, but I really want to pick up from what Leo said about the empathy, because it's kind of an abstract term, but how can we sort of specifically explore around that? Like, how do we how do we really find the empathy with life experiences and people who we are very unfamiliar with, and not to make it a sort of, I don't know, because empathy, I feel like it also has this potential to be authentic or not authentic. Like, you can have some emotions from the surface, and that could actually prevent you from really understanding those subjects, because you just feel, like their life is struggle, whatever. This is very common response from a lot of people who watch some documentaries from the first time. They feel moved, and that's all. That sort of prevent them from actually really going deeper into living through some lives of these subjects. So I guess, I don't know if this is a question, but I would really love to hear a little bit more about how editors actually help co-create, or, this experience of authenticity from, hundreds of hours of footage from the filmmakers. Yeah.
No, but I think empathy is something that you can't prevent as humans. Like, even if you don't want to, you will have some automatisms of like looking at another human or looking at some life experience. You will seek connection, you will seek understanding, and it's even if you don't want to. But no, of course, I think when I was talking about emotions and stuff, it's a bit on the micro level, like when I'm working on details, because when you edit, you are like, everything is so timed and everything is like intentional. So you work on like micro details, and then that's the gut thing that guides you, because you can't explain, you can't say why like this, like that. It's a gut feeling. You feel it right. It has something right. But of course, you have to do your part of the work to do this research and know enough about the broader political, societal, economic context of what you film, so that you understand your own position in relationship to the position of what is in the film. And I think on that matter, it's also really interesting to work with Wang Ping, because next to his very like intuitive approach of just like being there with the people for a long time and living with them and experiencing it like very at the first front, he's also always very solid in his knowledge or research of the broader structures in which what he films is taking place. I think that's the question of ethics of you cannot be someone else when you film, and the people you're going to film are going to be them. But then if you're aware of the position of everyone in this system, this structure, I think that's very important. And as an editor, because of my background also, I studied politics before going to film, and it was just because my parents didn't want me to go to film school because they were like, oh no, it's risky, like how are you going to make a living out of this and stuff. So I picked politics because I thought, it's still some studies that they think, she could work at European Commission or be a diplomat. But in fact, it was just because it was really interesting to study humanities, and I'm also transnational because I was born in Belgium, but my parents are Chinese, and then I was trying to make sense of this mixed background, being a third culture kid. So I was like, I hear this in the medias here, but like my education and my family, I feel something else, and I want to make sense of all of this. So I was doing this work of like getting informed on a more theoretical level, but films are not films are it's an art form, and you can do academics or you can do research next to it, but like in the end the audience is gonna experience this like art forms thingy. So it goes hand in hand, I think.
Thanks a lot for the presentations, and also to Spring, obviously, the movie. Thanks for editing and producing it. It was really great. I have 3 questions. The first one is to the entire panel. I'm still grappling with the concept of authenticity, and I think apart from the last kind of inputs, we haven't really talked about what we actually understand by authenticity. And my maybe polemic question is, what is the actual value about discussing whether or not something is or is not authentic? And I think, Leo, you kind of alluded to that. I mean, there is a large debate about that, but any kind of representation is political. It is based on or it has to do with the positionality of, all people involved. And so I'm wondering, is there really any value for us to discuss films or any forms of, culture, industrial productions, in the sense of, is this authentic or not? Because is this even a question that we can answer? In most cases, when this question is posed, it's a very slippery slope, but it can get to very reactionary, nationalistic or whatever, tendencies to some extent, even if someone says, no, this is authentic and what you do is not authentic. I think, and personally, I think a more interesting question would be, how are, in this case, filmmakers and people involved in creating a film trying to argue that something is authentic? That's the more interesting question, to go a step beyond and say, what are the attempts, or are there any attempts to actually make a point that this is something authentic from an analytical point of view? So, but my question is, what is the value actually of saying something is authentic or not? And the two other short questions are specifically to Leo and the movie by Wang Bing, which is, first of all, how did you get access to the companies? If you know, to the companies, how did you get to the factories? Yes. Yes, and the third question is, do you know if in the process of editing the movie was actually also shown to the workers that you were involved with? And did they have kind of a say in, talking about authenticity? Did you kind of contact them and show them a first version or a first draft of that? And if not, did you show them the movie afterwards already? And what was the reactions of the workers to the movie, seeing them on the screen?
Yeah, I was working on the edit in Paris after he completed shooting. So I know from some behind the scenes infos, but like I wasn't there on shoot. But while we were editing Spring, I went on shoot with him on other projects. So I also witnessed how he films. But yeah, I think he has answered. He gets those questions often, and it's always very down to earth answers. He's always like, I just met that person and I just followed that person and then I just started filming. And I think it's his strength, but also a bit this strange like mystery that people are like, how come you got into their lives and stuff? It's just that he is very straightforward, and he has this he connects with someone. He has this relation of like, you trust me to tell your story, so I'm gonna tell it, and it's we benefit both ways from it, because you agree for me to film you, and then he just goes and then he just documents. And with Spring, it's he met some youngsters in the train coming back from the shooting of Three Sisters in Yunnan, and then they told him, oh, we're gonna go there to work, and then he followed them, and then he discovered this whole world of this kind of specific labor force and this region that he didn't know, and then he started to document it. And then also this question of like, do people have a saying with the editing, and do they see the film? No, they don't. But it's also weird that, not weird, but like for our understanding, it's weird. But like when you're in the thing, it's like a lot of them, they don't really care. They don't realize, and they also, it's not their type of cinema. I would say it's quite, yeah. They call him very often. They call him teacher, journalist, or on set, because they're like, he has a Sony Alpha 2 camera, no sound, how you say? I'm French speaking. No recordist. So it's like a really simple, and I think that what allows him to be so straightforward is that it's just him and this small camera, and he's like really discreet. And then he interacts with them. We, like when we were on shoot with him, we eat with the people, we just spend the day with them, and he happens to record. But there is also a human relationship that happens. And when I say empathy and the experience in the lives of people, it's really a total experience of just living together with them for a time being. And he also says sometimes like, it's like my life is this river and their life is this river, and the path of our rivers cross for that time being, and I have the right to make a film out of it because we did have a portion of our life that we spent together. And then it's funny because a lot of people that are in the film, they have still contact with him. And when we were editing, they would text or they would call, be like, "How are you? Oh, I'm getting married. Would you want to send a bit of money for my marriage, like hongbao?" And then he's like, "Congratulations!" And they're just asking, "How are you doing? I'm doing like this and stuff." But they're not so interested in the film. And it's different with, for example, the last film he made, Man in Black, or we did another film with a painter called God. Hi, and these people, they're closer to the audience of like the kind of audience that would watch those films. So they watch the film and they have comments about it or whatever. But yeah, with Uspring, for example, it's just they never asked to like. Yeah, on some other projects also that we worked on, I was like, "Do you want to come to the premiere and stuff?" And they were like, "No." 6 hours, no, I'm not interested in watching that. So I hope it answers. And the question about authenticity, I don't know, why did you pick the topic? Maybe why is it important to discuss it?
Hello. Yeah, well, I think it's as one member from the curatorial team, we thought it was very valuable for us to understand how different actors, different roles from the film industry understand authenticity, as we are promoting a view of authenticity in Europe. Because we are always saying that we want to show the real China to European audiences, but then we also find it problematic sometimes as curators. What do we mean by realism? What do we mean by insider perspectives? And who are the insiders? And what do we mean by this is the authentic version of China? So we are also struggling with this notion. That's why we decided to organize these panels with experts from different sections of the film industry, show us their understanding of authenticity, so that in the future curatorial practices, we will be better aware of the importance of authenticity. Yeah, maybe you can, Professor, we can share a little bit insight.
I specialize in historical documentary, so authentic is something like I do through research. And we go through every image and then every newsreel we found, and we try to do this archaeologist thing of like, when did this happen and what happened before what? And so we do lots of research to make sure that everything is in the right place. Because a lot of time when you purchase newsreel footage from all sorts of sources, the description was often mistaken. So there was like it usually takes me 5 to 8 years to complete a film. Lots of the time went into research. And the other thing was our history. And once you do some research, and when people, you know, when you're talking to people, you could pick up these little lists from everywhere. And this is why like many people often ask and say, how could you get this person to speak so much? Because the film archive also interviewed her and she just didn't say a thing. And I said, did you ask the right question or a yes and no question? Because if you ask a question, they just say yes or no. And then you got no interview basically. So I just like invite them to do a free flow, but because I'm familiar with the background. Even when making like a Golden Gate Girls, and I asked my editing like a mentor who's a Hollywood editor, I said, this sounds like a very like a small film and specific topic, and how could I get a general audience to be interested in that? And he said, World War II. World War II is in the background, and World War II is the most filmed events in the whole world. And so if you had that going on in there, and then World War II in the background, what specific events in World War II would affect like my characters? And so those are the things that I would consider when creating a film together. This is why like, you know, most people, when they walk away from my film, and then they were like, I know nothing that was covered in this film. I learned so much. It was because of the years of the storytelling was really coming from research from oral history. And I relate to what Leo said about Wang Bin, because I also have many friends who are documentary filmmakers. And I said, you know, I just can't do what you do, because you could just follow this drug dealer for like 2 years or whatever. I just can't do that, right? I have a day job, and but you can't do what I do, because you never know where I found my footage and stuff, right? But there is this connectivity thing that I could just be there and listen to people tell story. I think this is a talent of mine. So I could get people to tell interesting story and the most like a tragic story of their lifetime. And but Wang Bin was using a direct cinema style. So he was like observational. And so it was a different method. And so this was like, you know, every time I do a film, I feel I did another PhD. Just
Thank you so much. And I'm sure we can talk for hours and hours about authenticity, but due to time limit, we have to wrap up. Yeah, we're going to have another screening with Professor Louisa Wei later at 8 p.m. So if you haven't grabbed a ticket, make sure that you buy a ticket now so we can enjoy the film together. And thank you so much for coming to today's panel discussion. And I really want to extend my sincere gratitude to Professor Zhang Zhen and Liu Ying for sharing insights with us today. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, there's so much more to be talked about.
Thank you so much.
That's like, yeah, she like looks more Chinese when she was younger, but when she was older.
In the Chinese Cinema Week for inviting me. I really wish I could have been with you for this session, but unfortunately it's not possible, and I apologize for being able to talk with you only through this video, but I will be happy to try to share a few proposals with you if you agree. What I wish to say is that the rest of the world has not been aware of the immensity and the depth and the speed of the mutation of this country, China, with the size and the population of a continent that it has been going through. Chinese cinema, way beyond the obsolete barrier between fiction and documentary, Chinese filmmakers translated through cinema procedures and various kinds, including occasionally digital found footage, animation, and CGI, the realities of the country in its shifts that performed in a handful of decades that took more than a century in many other parts of the world. Of course, I am speaking as a foreigner, as a non-Chinese, and I would not dare to comment on the way this was influential inside China itself, depending also on the opportunities to actually watch these films made by the independent filmmakers and presenting non-official visions of the society and its mutations. There is a vast history still to be elaborated and told of the circulation of indie movies in China through a vast amount of initiatives, locations, and procedures. But, from abroad at least, nothing, absolutely nothing, and certainly not the news on televisions or in the newspapers, gave a documented yet sensitive approach of the vast phenomena we are talking about. and that are still going on in various ways. Personally, I stopped to refer to numbered generation somewhere in the middle of the 90s, so I won't use the term sixth generation, since we are talking now of a long-term phenomenon that covers much more. But it is great that the ICCW show films from directors of various statuses and ages, including as well Lu Ye, than much younger filmmakers. But among them is one that for me embodies a vast amount of what cinema did provide in terms of reality, of the realities of China. And this is, of course, Wang Bing. Since West of Tract, at the beginning of this century, Wang Bing have been developing this double approach of contemporary daily life seen from the poorest, the weakest, the left side of the Chinese boom, and of the history of the country since the end of the 1950s through the memory of all those who were victims of political persecution and misleading decisions that affected the lives of millions. Three Sisters or The Man Without Name testifies for the first approach, when He Fengming or The Dead Souls are great examples of the second. But maybe none is as significant as the one which is being screened at ICCW, the film Youth. Because what you see, what you hear, what you feel is a much more complex understanding of what is at work in sweatshops where young people from the countryside so hardly make a living. It is a protest against terrible conditions of life, but not only that. As before Bitter Money, Wang Bing also gives a sense of the vital energy which is here in action, and without hiding the multiple dark sides, also provides an access of the move forward that these young people are experiencing. This is, I believe, giving access to the reality in its multi-layered nature. I cannot avoid here to compare with the one I consider among the most important filmmakers of our time. I didn't say the important Chinese filmmakers, but filmmakers in general. And this is, of course, Jia Zhangke. And I will refer here only to one film, even if it's already almost 20 years old, The Word. The way it did address realities inside China based on the relation to fake objects from outside, the models of foreign monuments in the amusement park, and that it anticipated that virtual image and digital communication would become so intensely part of our daily reality remains, to me, a highlight of the powers of the cinema to build a better understanding of what is happening and possibly of what is likely to happen. This is maybe the only way for the camera to not lie, certainly not by relying on the basic recording of what is there, but by building, through framing and editing, a sufficiently open proposal infused by real situation, but giving access to elaboration by each viewer so that he or she can connect what is to be seen and heard with other factors of understanding related simultaneously with knowledge and emotions. Again, I would have loved to discuss this more precisely, these questions that are expressed in the seminar presentation, and sometimes challenge them. I regret it won't be possible this time. I hope maybe some other time. For the moment, I wish you a great week of screenings and discussions. Zaijian. Auf Wiedersehen.
In the panel discussion in the Chinese Cinema Week 2023. Thank you.
Bye.